with this concept of truth, and it's sort of a abstract concept because there's different definitions for people, but it seems like when people go sometimes to a tribunal hearing, they're both putting forward accounts of the same thing. Like they're trying to describe the same person or the same phenomena that's happening, but they do it really, really differently. And you sent me some of the material you had shared with them, and that made sense to me. And you also sent me the report that they were using as well, which kind of had some similarities, but some important sort of differences. Will you be given the opportunity to try and share your experience and your perspective to the tribunal, or have you already?
Yes, so they ask very specific questions. I will admit that the questions that they ask on their what's known as a self-report are quite accurate and quite specific. So I'm pretty sure I shared that with you as well. Not
Yes.
100% sure. So I answered their questions, and they're the questions that they regard as the most important questions for determining whether I need to be on continued authority. So the answer to your question is yes, I am given the opportunity to say things in my own way. But the paradigms in which we operate are so different because they're operating from a legal and sort of rules-based perspective, and I'm operating from a possibly more liberalist or libertarian, whatever you want to call it. And obviously, um, I feel like I'm more impartial, and I have my own personal liberty in mind much more than they do. They don't really care about that. So the fact that I've been on this authority for so many years, how many years has it been? More than 10,
Yeah.
12, up to 18 years. So it's been so long, and they still don't acknowledge that. It's not kind of, it's every year they renew it. It's like they don't have a problem with doing that. So the actual impact of that is quite a lot on the client because it's just so repetitive and it's unfair. But they look at the rules that govern their decision making, and they don't look far beyond that. So their scope of context is very narrow. I'm trying to work with things with them from first principles. That means looking at things which question their authority in the first place. Um, what else? The fact that they're treating me at arm's length. I've told
Guys,
you.
when you say at arm's length, can you tell me a bit more about that? Because you've said it a few times, so it seems like it's important.
Mm. So things like not being particularly friendly or meeting for the first time and then making a judgment for the first time. Not like you were doing, which is like getting to know the person and the situation and the context from a much broader general perspective, which I think is so important. They don't do that sort of thing. They don't ask me about my finances. They don't ask me about my friendships or my talents, my skills. All these things are so interesting to me, but to them, it's irrelevant. They think that my mental health is just confined to taking medication and whether I'm scared of that medication and um, just I don't know what else. Medication is like the pillar of conduct.
Yeah.
So I don't agree with that. I think that the social model and the whole, if they deal with the whole model, it would be much more thorough and realistic and caring as well.
Yeah. And also, if the medicine worked so well, they they would achieve their goals. I don't understand. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me with the medicine. They're like, well, you have to take the medicine because if you don't, you won't be safe or you won't be well. And then they make people take the medicine, and then they still make like it doesn't change anything. Like they still think the person is kind of unsafe or dangerous or something.
That's right. So medication these days is regarded as essentially palliative, I think the word is. And that means that it's not a cure for the so-called illness or disease, which is, I mean, it's unfortunate that they don't have something that you can just take once and then forget about it.
Yeah.
So sad.
They're like a antibiotic for an infection.
Yeah, something like that. So mental illness is an ongoing thing according to them, and they think that they can reduce the symptoms. Well, not. I don't even think they claim to reduce the symptoms. What they do is what are their claims? Not even sure. I don't think reducing. I think reducing the symptoms may be one of the claims that they have, but I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah. I think
The symptoms don't go away entirely according to them, but they are reduced in some way.
one of the main things that they tries to target is hearing voices. I'm not sure if you do or have heard voices before, but that's something that they say is like there's a good impact on that from the medication, or at least a moderate impact from medication.
Yeah, so I don't claim to have heard any voices, although they have, in various occasions, claimed that I have. So I can't measure it. I can't use it as a metric for how well the medication's going because
Yeah.
I haven't experienced that before myself.
And the alternative is that they want the medicine to try and reframe or reshape people's unusual beliefs that they have, especially if those beliefs are impacting their lives negatively. Well, that's the claim anyway.
That's really strange because they don't tell me much. Well, I think with some of your other clients, I think you mentioned that they do have a lot of psychoeducation, but for me, my beliefs are not thoroughly questioned. I'd like to see more of that rather than less.
Yeah,
So,
that seems important because you don't have a shortage of strongly held beliefs or you do clearly value things as important and have perspectives on things. But what stood out from me from mainly from the report that you sent me that was written by the um the authority was that there was this kind of narrative that sort of deep down there's something that's not right that could be bad.
hmm. Well, I actually responded in the last tribunal session that there were many, many diagnoses which could be made about my life. And we established in your words as well that not every diagnosis needs to be treated as such. And I think that's the crux of it. So yes, deep down there may be something wrong, but not one thing. I think it's many things.
Yeah. Well, so
And
they
when we
say.
look,
I'm not saying there is, but that's their sort of assertion.
yeah, but the problem with them is that they didn't even look deep. They didn't look that deep down. They were looking at the surface of things. They obviously rely on my responses a lot, and I think they've misinterpreted them a lot as well. And so, and they don't invest much research into my claims. So if I claim something happened 30 years ago, it's impossible to go back into that
Yeah.
for them. They could ask people who were there at the time, but obviously, they don't feel that's their obligation and they don't invest the time or effort to do that. They could, but it would be an investment of effort and time.
Are there still things that like you have told them and you've said, but they like really strongly disagree, but you think would be quite easy to demonstrate that that thing had occurred?
I like to investigate, you mean?
Yeah, like you say something, they think it's made up or some sort of symptom, but actually it could be quite easily shown to be true if they tried to talk to someone or hear you out.
Well, I don't envy their role because I do understand that talking to people can be, it's so anecdotal sometimes. It's so airy that sometimes when you talk to people, they might have forgotten, after so long. So sometimes unearthing these things is not easy. There are some close people who still follow me on Facebook, for example, who I think would be in a great position to expose some of the things that I went through. One of these persons is named Andrew, for example, who I think knows a lot about my history and will be in a great position to expose some of my claims. But
Mm.
he's not been asked, and I don't think he will be asked.
Is there something that you really want people to know, even not even more than the authority? Like, is like you just want to be public about and share that you haven't felt like you've been given the opportunity to or been taken seriously enough?
Now, that's a very good question. Look, I don't mind having everything exposed because I think that the truth has an element of sort of it saves people from having to tell lies, you know. So I don't really mind the whole history being exposed. It would disintegrate some of the mystery and obviously the kudos that comes with that. But even so, I don't really mind. So my whole history is there for everyone to absorb. It's not easy to communicate. Communication is the problem with humankind, I think, that we try to tell each other other particular things, like my philosophy, for example, and that doesn't go across very well to some people. Even though, you know, and there is a lot of things that I know about certain things which I can't distill in an easy and convenient format to other people. So I don't mind my whole story being expressed to other people, but I very much doubt that other people will fully understand it, even if it was expressed to them.
Yeah, yeah. Even in like the history that you sent me, like I started to see a picture of who you are, but it's not, it's not full yet. Like I feel like even like if someone like a doctor or whomever meets with you, you're only just getting pieces of the picture.
I think, and you know, Hamilton, I think that that can be often a good first step because if you know the patient is intelligent and knows what he's talking about, you can sort of trust the patient more, but they don't trust me. So I'm not in a position to help them to help me, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. I mean, you're clearly intelligent. Do you think that they don't think that you're intelligent? They think you're not capable?
They say that I'm intelligent, but that I lack insight, which is a contradiction in itself. But they don't mind making that contradiction. They've never reconciled that contradiction. So that's unfortunate for me.
What are you lacking insight to? I mean, I can guess, but I want to hear it from you.
Um, Honestly, they just said that I lack insight. So it's a very general way of looking at of expressing themselves. But I'd like to hear it from you because I don't know where I lack insight particularly. I mean, I'm not the smartest, most cognitively fast person in the world, but in terms of my life priorities and how I take in information and sort of process that in a very careful way, I think that I'm 100% intelligent, you know. So I'm
Yeah.
happy to learn from you what you think is I'm lacking insight in.
I don't know. I don't necessarily know, but really common things they say is the person lacks insight and the person they'll diagnose with something, usually something like psychosis or schizophrenia, and then the person will say, "No, I don't have that. I'm fine actually," even though they might quite clearly be having a really hard time and they're not, but they still think things are fine. That might be one example. That's a general example, but a more specific example could be a person that has like some belief system, and we'll pick a really like weird one. Like the person thinks like there's a little alien that lives inside of them, and then the doctors will say, that's actually a symptom of a mental illness, and they'll say, no, no, it's not. It's because there really is a little person in there, and then they have like this conflict over it. So those are the two things that are most common for like lacking insight. So I don't know if either apply, or if you feel either apply. I'm not sure if they do anyway, because like I feel like you understand concepts of mental health and the your belief system. It's not the most common one, but it's not absurd or that weird.
So I don't have a belief like that little alien that you were talking about. Most of my beliefs or so-called delusions have been real world based. So things that I observe, and I give a name to it, a collective name to it. So that's my way of looking at the world sometimes. And the word belief, as I said, is subjective because you can think and imagine certain things and not really, and even certain things would drive you to the edge of sort of believing them, I guess. But are they really beliefs? That they're not fixed and fast. They can be altered by people being nice to you, people inviting you to be comfortable and just chatting about things, and that can release the belief into something more amenable and something that makes the person feel like maybe, okay, well, if you think that I'm being delusional, I'm happy to reconsider that particular point or something.
Yeah, I don't like I really like you don't appear to have fit at any kind of box that someone could say, oh, this person's really delusional because I don't know, yeah, you don't you don't, but there's this kind of like in authority report, like they create an like we've already talked about this, but like a narrative, like you create a narrative about a person, and like this person is mentally ill, and as a result, everything they've ever done and ever said is always relevant to the current picture, and altogether, it's way worse than the sum of its parts. Like, um, so it can be really hard to lose that label when they make a narrative about you.
Yes, that's right. So
Mm.
unfortunately, they they like to, well, they have a sort of ego themselves, right? If they're wrong, the consequences of them being wrong can be very devastating for them, right?
Yeah,
So, and as I mentioned to you before, science is ignorance. Science is being able to accept that you have to change your paradigm or your model of thinking, but they're not able. They're not scientists, in my opinion. They're pseudoscientists. That's how I would label them because their stakes are high for being wrong.
yeah,
So that's how I feel about them. Unfortunately, I wish it were not the case. But and if they had more vested interest in the patient's well-being, they wouldn't have that problem. But because they're funded by certain things, funded by mentally ill patients, pretty much, that they have an onus on themselves to be right all the time. It's
yeah.
unfortunate.
And they can make people a bit. Um, one of the things you sent me, you wrote a letter, and it wasn't the self-report, and it wasn't the report. It was a letter you had written, and when I read it, I could see that, or I could feel kind of that you were mad, or that you were angry about your experience. And from what I've seen with other people, sometimes people's experience of being angry gets turned into a kind of rationale for their, like, oh, you see this person is angry and therefore they're sort of crazy in some way, and that's how we can be.
That's absolutely right. In fact, it's one of the hallmarks of my report. You'll see that even though they don't provide great evidence of my illness, they top that over with reports of my aggression, which
Yeah,
that obviously happened because I've been an angry client, obviously. So they top that up with saying, oh, he was aggressive. He was aggressive against the police or some other patient on some occasion.
yeah, it said you assaulted a AFP officer.
I'm sorry.
I think it says you assaulted an AFP
Yeah,
officer. Yeah,
which is a really stupid way of saying that I was trying to free myself or something from that particular occasion. So whether I assaulted them or not, they're the ones who have the power to cause more damage, and they should be able to use that power to either kind of contain the patient, the problem, or deal with it in their own way or something. But they shouldn't say that I saying that I assaulted them is really strange. The fact that I had no weapons, I never carried a knife, or so it's
yeah,
just really strange the way that they phrased that.
yeah. Do you think that, well, what do you think will be the outcome of this tribunal? Will your experience prevail? It may seem unlikely, but do you have a sense?
Um, so Darren did mention that there were literally 6 people in the last year or something who had their authority revoked.
Yeah,
So six, I don't know how many, probably hundreds. But
quite a
what
lot.
was, yeah, so what Darren was saying was that it is possible, and I think that they're working towards, because they've been on it for so long, they are working towards a sort of giving me a benefit of the doubt. That was what Darren said at one point, just one point. So there's just a faint idea that I might be revoked, my authority may be revoked. And I think that will happen eventually, but because it's happening too late, I don't feel like I should be. particularly grateful about that.
Yeah, it's kind of like you just what you want has been finally reinstated after so long.
Mm. It's been far too long. Um, I haven't had the chance to gauge myself the fact, with the social model that I'm okay with not being forced to do what they want me to do. I will admit though that my medication is not the highest form. It's not like injecting me every week. It's only every 5 weeks now, so that there's an element of restraint there which I appreciate. But at the same time, there's still that onus on me, that obligation which I don't like.
Yeah, it's an ongoing struggle.
Yeah.
Um,
And Hamilton, you're welcome to talk about your own experiences as well if you want to. If you
thanks.
feel like doing that, it's completely
You
your
know,
choice.
I feel a bit uh, guilty because in my life I've been really, really lucky to avoid community, well, ongoing, like long-term community treatment. I've had lots of inpatient admissions and short-term involuntary community treatment, but not ongoing, like long-term 6 month experiences. Because I've been really well supported, but also partially because I just don't I don't communicate what I'm feeling and thinking, and sometimes that saves me um, from having some negative consequences.
That's
And
interesting.
yeah, and it pains me because like I want to I care about being open and sharing and people saying the truth and saying what they feel. Um, but I'm a bit afraid to because I think it sometimes would have negative outcomes for me. So I try to balance it. So I'm very impressed by those people that feel confident to be open and articulate, you know, who they are and what they care about freely. Have you always you've it seems like you've always been someone who was like a free thinker and free speaker.
No, only in the most recent years when I settled down and had some sort of comfort in my life was I really able to speak out. And obviously with social media, some of my early videos are pretty shoddy, and so I wasn't the best speaker. But when I started YouTube, and even in the years after that, I had to take a lot of time before I got to this point. I'm not saying I'm a very good speaker now, but I'm much better than I was before, if you know what I mean.
Oh, you sound very good, very intelligent, and
Yeah, thank
capable.
you.
It's good.
So I'm basically saying that I had to improve myself. So if it take me back 7 or 8 years, I would not have been able to talk on this video conference as I am now. It would have been quite difficult for me. So things have changed.
What do you think was like prohibiting you, and how did you get past it?
Just my history. So my parentage was very. So we had a family set of values, right? Which, and my dad was very antisocial in regards to social engagements and so on. So I took that from my dad. My mum was also a little bit narcissistic, I guess the word is, and she would monopolize the conversations a lot. So in that sense, it was she. My parents weren't very good role models for me, and there was the tradition, and especially in Asian sort of based families, that men would tended to be very laid back and not talk very much, and the women would do most of the talking. So even when I interacted with my few cousins who were available to be my sort of playmates when I was a child, we didn't get along well with each other, and we weren't encouraged to speak like I'm speaking to you now. So it was a very different culture. So I brought that into my 20s and even my 30s a lot. When I took up the big issue and sold magazines on the street, I got back a lot of. Well, I had charisma when I was a child, which was with my dad. He did all these random shouts when he was like, which are kind of weird, aberrant sort of behaviors, sort of shouts and stuff. But he wasn't sociable in that sense. So when I um, started selling the Big Issue magazine, I would use that talent that I had with that charisma to spruik to people and say things to people on the streets sort of randomly. And that was kind of like a good thing because it got me a lot of sales at a certain point in Canberra. And I kind of worked off that. And when social media came, it was a different type of communication again. Social media is all about speaking things in a story-like fashion. And like you said, like you do, asking questions and being amenable and being sort of comfortable with the other person, which is something that I couldn't do even in my 30s. So all this stuff has to be learned. And once you get used to the dynamic, it's much easier. But it was not always the case for me. I felt that I had to learn these things over many years.
Yeah.
I'd be very different talking to you 7 or 8 years ago. Very different dynamic. Yeah.
Really interesting. I'm also like interested in about like hearing about your family. Like, if you talk to them and you express your beliefs, either ones that you have now or ones you've had in the past, like, is your family like curious and open to hearing about those things, or do they think they're sort of crazy too?
So my parents aren't very good empaths in a very important sense. Like the little things that I complain about, sometimes they don't quite register those properly or respond to them properly. And um, so in terms of my ongoing complaints about mental health authority, they were the ones that initiated me to mental health authority, and they don't. Although they acknowledge that psychiatry, like my dad said once, psychiatry is like an art in its dark ages. Um, that's the best quote I can get out of him. But and my mum has tried to relinquish me from the hands of mental health by writing letters to them and so on, but not very much. So she has a limit to what she can do. And she's not extremely empathetic. She's mildly empathetic to my situation. But and the fact that I've been to hospital so many times, I think she doesn't realize how much suffering they've actually caused. Medication also, the fact that I have my own belief systems about medication and don't want to take unnecessary medication. She's not very clued up about that. So I wish she were more empathetic, but she's not really. She's on the kind of maybe she's empathetic in certain things,
Yeah.
and she can give good advice and so on in certain things. But I would say she's maybe 4 out of 10 for general empathy, about 4 out of 10. My dad also, he can do certain things, and he's opened up in terms of like he's given me financial opportunity now, which he didn't in the past. Um, but in the past, he was because he has this philosophy of stoicism and how you have to tolerate so many things without complaining. It's very hard to complain to him and get a good response from him because he just doesn't care that much. So
Mm.
once again, I'd say his empathy is about the same, 4 out of 10.
Wow. Hearing that feels a bit bleak, Mark. That's yeah, having both your parents being as you said, a 4 out of 10.
I
That's
mean, if they had good conversations like we're doing, it would level the playing field a lot and it would make things much more comfortable for me. Like if you're asking really good questions and you try to understand the person's point of view, that to me is a really good sign.
yeah. The
Um,
reason I asked that question is because sometimes in different contexts, people see us as different things. That's probably not remarkable to you, but like in the mental health context, we get seen as crazy. But sometimes if we share our beliefs and experiences with like our family, they might say there's nothing, you're fine. There's nothing wrong with you. As well as that, you talked about the online space. Have you found that to be more like open to different or unusual perspectives and ways of thinking, or do you simultaneously get kind of critiques and criticisms saying that you're mad or in some way?
yeah, so there are various people on social media, a lot of differences of opinion. I have had people who have been really empathetic to me and said, we people who have empathized and said we feel sorry for you that you've had to go through this. with mental health, and we wish it were different. And these people are the people who often lead to me becoming good friends with them or something, or maybe not so much, but at least there's a level of really good friendship there. And there are other people who struggle to understand, and they might agree on certain things. It's like my friend Andrew, another Andrew. He despises the police like I do, and he wrote a whole book about it, which is why we probably one of the reasons we became friends in the first place. But in terms of believing or not believing that, in terms of not believing that I have a mental illness, it's harder to convince him of that. So he kind of sides with the psychiatrist on that point of view. So people are their own individual have their own individual way of looking at things, and there are people online who really you get along with and you can tell them your whole story to, and there are people who are much more prejudiced about the whole situation. So there's
Yeah.
a whole, and there are people in the middle who, some people who just say they're completely ignorant and they can't say one way or the other, and you might be friends with them for some other reason or something.
Yeah. And are there other people in your life, maybe like friends or people you either did do or used to work with? Do they see you like how do they see you? What kind of lens or what kind of narrative do they apply to you?
So I don't have that many in real life friends. I have a few, and also the NDAS contributes a few sort of friends, if you like, who I can tell my beliefs to and so on. But the depth of conversation is not quite as I'm doing with you. So there's a shallowness there which I don't really like. I prefer to go deeper and be able to tell everyone everything. But unfortunately, most people don't have that vested interest in finding the truth to the lowest level. So
Are there things that, you've been really wanting to share with someone that you haven't had like the opportunity to, that you maybe are
so
nervous or
so
worried?
that document that I shared with you with my entire history, which that I tabulated for you, I spent hours on that literally actually. And that's something that I really wanted to tabulate. So I'm really pleased that I did that for you and for everybody. So obviously I've released it to whoever wants it. Not many people other than yourself have really asked for it. Unfortunately, I think my parents may have had a look at it, but literally, I think very few people really are interested in that. I might share it with my clinicians, and they have an obligation to read that. But I think their understanding of that will be partial, and then once again, misinterpretation and miscommunication and just not believing what I have to say will be part of their problem, unfortunately.
Yeah. Do you is that like do you do you generally feel that? Do you generally feel that whatever you say just is not going to be believed?
There's a level of communication, as I mentioned, with the human species. We think we're good communicators, but actually our ability to communicate something that we've experienced in the past is really limited. So I do believe that if I say something, it's going to be misinterpreted, it's going to be misconstrued, and it's going to make this story more complicated and push things out of my perspective and create
Can
a
you
new perspective or something like that. Yeah.
can you give me an example of a recent time where one thing has sort of got misconstrued?
Um, well, I can give an example. When I tried to explain what happened at NIDA in 1998, this was something that I tabulated for you in really brief form. So I wouldn't be surprised if you didn't quite get that. But I think you understand that there were certain things that happened on a particular day where I felt something was very strange or something. And I tried to communicate that to a psychiatrist at the mental health clinic. And he absorbed that. And one of the things he said was, don't you think that all this stuff is irrelevant now? That's what he said to me. Don't you think that what happened so long ago is now not relevant? That's what he said. And for me, it is relevant because it contributes to the mystery of what happened so long ago. But they don't see it that way. They think that these little instances are no longer relevant to me being mentally ill, whereas they actually are, the
Yeah.
diagnosis and everything.
Well, and that's also not that's like such a that's not someone saying it's not true. It's just a complete negation of it, saying it's not important.
Exactly.
I remember reading something about NIDA, but it's not on top of my head now. But you said, was it something? It sounds like it's something really important happened, not just like you remember it and it was uh, a bit unusual, but something quite significant. Is that right?
It was the way that they assessed me and observed me that made me kind of feel creeped out. It's the sort of thing that you'd like to happen at Halloween because it makes you spooked out a little bit. So they were observing me, and I had the impression that they thought that I was really good at acting or something. And I'm not going to make a judgment on that myself today, but I thought that they thought that I was a good actor, and I thought that they were observing me. And so that carried on into when I left the workshop, it carried on into my everyday life where I thought that they were observing me. I thought that people were observing me and so on. And because they are a government organization, they work with the government, I had the idea that they might have been monitoring me in some way. So that grew into another story. So if I hadn't attended NIDA, if I hadn't worked with them for a couple of weeks, the whole story of my entire belief system might have been very different.
Yeah. And now looking back on it, do you think that NIDA was observing you outside of the school, or was that just a thing that you felt at the time?
Um, well, I have no definitive proof. I would say that most likely they would have forgotten about me. But I guess so. I'm not accusing myself of being delusional, but I will say that my sense of what was completely true would have been a little bit distorted. Um, and there
Yeah.
are some things that I believe that I don't believe now, which I did believe then. The idea that they might have been observing me, kind of thing. So sorry, I've kind of forgotten your question.
No, it's because sometimes we believe things at the time, and then in the future we look back on it and go, well, that probably didn't happen. But I was just wondering if you believe today the same thing you believed in the past, or did it sort of shift with time? Because beliefs change, and also memories kind of our relationship to them changes as well.
Yeah, it's hard to. I mean, when you're young and you're impressionable, a lot of things can go past. Not kind of like can make you believe certain things. Like I thought so. Tim Elston is it's hard to not imagine him looking at you, kind of thing. The way that he looks at you, you can't go past. And being charismatic and so on, and I do understand now that most people mind their own business a lot more than I used to believe. So, once our meeting ends, for example, I imagine you go back to your life and you'll interview other clients and other people who are doing research with you, and you will. There's this element that will end the relationship, which is which is fair enough. But I didn't really understand that at the same time, and I really wanted people to be interested in me as well. So there's this vested interest in wanting to believe that people were interested in me on an ongoing basis. So that's where I got this thing about people observing me. So the element of truth is very real. That I don't accuse myself of being delusional because I think the word delusion is a very strong word, which is not accurate to describe what I was feeling at the time. I really wanted people to be observing me, but at the same time, I wanted them to show an element of care, which they didn't show, and kindness towards me. So, um, yeah, it's a long story, but pretty much I don't believe in what I believed in so much, but I don't blame myself at the same time for what I believed in.
Yeah. It sounds like there was a desire to be seen or observed in some way, and that was in relation to being appreciated or known and cared about in some manner. Um, and it is, attending a school like that, you would have been being observed at the very least within the school, looking at you, sizing up whether you're any good at a certain thing.
Yeah. Have
Sense.
you heard of the word pronoia? Not paranoid, but pronoia. Have you heard of that?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I think J.D. Salinger popularized it at one stage. He's a famous writer from 1940s or something. And so it's the idea that people are watching you for good reasons rather than bad reasons. So that's an interesting diagnosis in itself, which is different from what they would diagnose with what the authorities would diagnose me with. Just
And
just the idea of paranoia.
and did does it does this you said that this was the first time it was kind of the you felt as though you were being observed in a way that you hadn't been before. Does this bear any kind of link to some of the other beliefs you had with regards to like surveillance um, systems?
Absolutely, yeah. So that was the start of that, really. It was actually the start. I mean, if you go back further and look at my beliefs in telepathic experiences or something,
I remember that.
uh, yeah, that kind of comes into it as well. So there's a little bit of gradational sort of thing. So it started off with one belief and then sort of reinforcement with NIDA, and then grew into something about being paranoid about surveillance and so on. So as you can see, it's a story which grew over many years.
Yeah, and it grew, and it didn't. I'm not sure it necessarily warranted such in sort of intrusive mental health system involvement or an invasion into your space and life, but it became sort of a part of it. And you've said that people didn't really ask about your kind of beliefs and experiences very much, which I find a bit sad, really.
Yeah, I've never been able to document it because there's so many of them. And finally, I took hours to do that. But in terms of sourcing my experiences, they're really bad at that. Johan Hari, who's a writer and speaker on depression who I really admire, once said, the question we should ask is not what's wrong with you, but what happened to you. What happened to you? And that's a question that Mental Health Authority have not asked really, really carefully and caringly. So
well,
it's their fault really for not doing that.
considering that, Mark, is what happened to you what occurred at NIDA, or was there something before that that happened to you too?
Yeah, so the things that go back to my early teens all started really, that was one sort of start of the story. It was a low level start. Well, I wouldn't say low level, but it was pretty impactful what happened to me, and but it did build up, and so with NIDA wasn't the start of it. In a sense, it was a continuation. So in one way, it was like a new paradigm, but at the same time, it was a variation of what happened before, when I was in my early teens and beyond that.
And was it a similar thing that was happening in your early teens, or was it just another sort of unusual experience?
So in my early teens, a couple of things. One was, telepathic experiences. Another one was being accused and suspecting myself of having an odor of some kind.
Yeah.
So both of these were very unsociable sort of beliefs and very hard to deal with as a young teenager, obviously. Didn't know how to deal with it. And so having that sort of conundrum in my life was very, very off-putting and tore down my family relations and made me academically much less proficient. So I was doing very well at the start of year 7, for example, and then eventually I was only in the top 15% at the end of high school, which is not bad by some people's standards. By my standards, it was far below my potential.
Yeah. And
Uh,
Mark, is there an even earlier thing that happened? I mean, can we trace it further back again?
Not really. So my childhood life was quite, although it had its own problems, I would say that my childhood life was categorically happy. So I did have problems, and obviously socializing was one of the things which I had problems with moving from that point. But my childhood did not have strange instances like my teenage years did.
And like, were you were born in Australia? Is that right?
I was born in Canberra, yeah, 1979.
79. And I mean, I'm sorry if I'm making something that's not there, but were there many people that like looked like you or from the same culture in Canberra at the time?
Um, I I didn't have a problem with things like racism or prejudice about about my appearance. I was brought up in a sort of somewhat protected, somewhat privileged um, environment. So my education was taken care of like in terms of I was able to go to school every day, and I had a few people in my class who were also Asian and something or similar in their culture. So it was never a huge problem, and I've never accused other Australians of being particularly racist. I don't. There are some people who believe that we live in a racist country. I'm not really of that belief. I do know there are elements of racism, and I was treated right in a racist way by one person in high school, but that was one person, and I dealt with that because I was kind of tough, and I don't look I don't look at victimizing myself when there's no reason to do that. So I don't really think Australia is a very racist country. When I go out and just live my life, I don't encounter much racism to myself, but I can imagine it would be worse for people who are like skin, for example. They might well experience a lot more discrimination that way. And I do understand that Aboriginal people live 8 years less than the average, for example. There must be a reason for that. There must be a reason why there have been so many Aboriginal deaths in custody and so many Aboriginal people incriminated for their behaviours and their so-called crimes and so on.
Yeah.
So from my point of view, I because I think I understand that Asians are kind of more resilient. So I think because Asians, um, the culture is more high achieving, and I'm not saying that I'm that sort of person, but in general,
Yeah.
Asians seem to do better. So I'm just happy about that.
Yeah.
Without saying that I'm necessarily a high achiever myself.
I You're certainly very capable if you're not a high achiever. Um, the reason I ask is because sometimes we don't even remember or we don't even think about things that might have shaped the experiences that we have along the line, and it's a bit like charting it like this, like on a chain, is a bit kind of impersonal, but it's sort of practical to see maybe these things are linked, and so if then this origin seems to be around high school and the ideas of telepathic beliefs and having the sense that you had an odor and that was impacting people's relationships with you. These alone seem very significant contributors to what might happen or has happened um, along the line.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you ever, and looking back on those initial ideas, I know we touched on this a little bit last time, but like, do I and let's if we consider the telepathy as not conclusively scientifically proven, but not conclusively disproven. Most people consider it's unlikely. But do you have a strong sense that you know you do or have had those skills?
I haven't been conclusive myself, so I'm of the belief that it's I would say it's most likely to be true, but I wouldn't say 100%. I might be 60 or 70% in belief of telepathy.
Most people don't 100% fully commit to anything. They just, I believe this thing is true, more or less. It's not 0 or 1. In philosophy, it gets called fuzzy logic. So it's the in-between spaces. And what about the sense that you have an odor that you're giving off? Was that a temporary thing?
Well, there's something that I've never fully explained. So once again, in terms of the 0 and 1
Yeah.
concepts, it's really fuzzy to me because whilst I have evidence of an odor of some kind, I wanted to know what kind of odor it was. I wanted to know whether if I washed it would disappear, whether if I did certain things it would disappear. So I did all the experimentation, but even that was inconclusive. So
Yeah.
I've never been able to prove it. Nowadays, I don't worry about it very much at all because I don't believe that it's a problem with anybody anymore. Um, but it used to be something that people accused me of. Um, and so deep in my history, scientifically, it's really hard to
Yeah.
be a scientist and to nail that because it was really, really elusive. So unfortunately, I can't answer your question as a 0 or 1. All I
Okay.
can say is that I believe it may have been true, but even I don't have a percentage for that because the older one is a really difficult one. It's really, really difficult to pinpoint. It appeals like it seems really irrational to the people who are from the outside who've never experienced it. But from what I experienced, it seems to be really rational because
Yeah.
to justify what people's behaviors were towards me and the coughing and so on that occurred in class. So that sort of thing, really hard to pinpoint at all. Even I can't do it. Even with all the knowledge that I have, can't do
Yeah.
it.
You know, I'll in the psychiatric literature, there's this phenomena of like, it gets called olfactory syndrome, like OL factory syndrome.
Olfactory, yes.
Yeah, and it's a belief that someone has that they smell that they have this odor that's giving off, but it's not. But that existing can completely coexist with someone who also like who does give off an odor and a smell. So just because there's a phenomena where people believe that they smell and they don't, doesn't mean that there can't be a phenomena where people believe that they give off an odor and they do. But there's
Exactly.
these kinds of co-occurring ideas. They sit really close to one another. It's so
Sorry,
hard to
Hannah, I
keep
think you've just frozen. I don't know why that is.
on my back. Yeah, they're so close together that it's really, really hard to see which one you're looking at. And the implications are pretty significant as you've experienced.
Sorry, Hamilton, you're just freezing a little bit. Sorry about that.
Okay, that's all right. Hold on. Um, do I sound okay at the moment?
Sorry about that, Hamilton. I think you were just freezing. Yes, just for now you are. I'll tell you if you're freezing again though. Sorry about
Okay.
that. You're
Um,
freezing now. I can't see you moving. I don't know.
I think it might be on your end because now you're cutting out and does it say low?
So my connection is
I don't know how much you caught, but I was just saying that sometimes experiences and phenomena are very close to one another. So when we look at them, we sort of don't know which one we're looking at because it looks quite similar.
yeah.
And the implications seem, well, very significant for yourself. Um, and, considering like you post a lot on social media, but it seems like the people that you might want to hear some of this are not necessarily people on social media, but on like your treating team. Is that fair?
I'm happy to post to anybody who wants to listen, Billy.
Yeah. But like,
Uh,
it seems like you want the treating team to pay attention to some of this.
well, I don't mind if they're privy to what I say on social media as well. If they had the time and the effort to make that investment of time and look at what I write on social media, they're welcome to. All the stuff that I write is open. Sometimes it's a little bit, derogatory towards them, and I think they have to accept that I'm not happy with their treatment.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I'm happy for them to look at it all if they have the time and effort to do that.
We got to wrap up in a sec, but or actually maybe I will stop the recording here. But for the next